Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special edition of VLGA Connect. I'm Chris Eddy, and I'm joined by Kathryn Arndt, the CEO of the VLGA today, because we have a special guest to spend some time with. Hello, Kathryn. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Chris. It's good to be back on the program, and it's terrific to have the new Minister for Local Government join us today.
Well, we knew it was something special because Kathryn doesn't turn up just for anyone. Minister Nick Staikos, Local Government Minister in Victoria, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you here. Of course, you've been a councillor. I wanted to open the batting by asking you your reflections on your time as a councillor. And did you ever imagine that at some point you'd be sitting as the minister over the sector?
Well, I'll answer the last part first. No, I didn't imagine I'd ever be Minister for Local Government. I was elected to Glen Eira City Council 20 years ago this year.
Wow.
20 years ago this year, I was 19 and was the youngest, and to this day remain the youngest ever elected to Glen Eira Council. But I suppose, I think it's important just to talk about what led to my election to council. Glen Eira was plagued by bad governance among councillors at the time. It's a very different situation in the city of Glen Eira now, but at the time there was a municipal inspector's investigation which discovered that the relationship between councillors, and in some cases between councillors and council officers, had broken down so much and to a point where the council couldn't make decisions on behalf of their community. And so the local government minister at the time, Candy Broad, decided to dismiss the council on the recommendation of the municipal inspector. A few months later, I was elected, but I was elected along with a whole lot of new councillors, many of them young. I remember at the time, of the 9 councillors, there were 4 of us who were under the age of 30. 4 out of 9 under the age of 30. And so, it was pretty clear that the community just wanted to turn a new leaf at that time. So that's what got me into it. And ever since then, I think it's fair to say that the city of Glen Eira has had a long period of good and proper governance and has made some great decisions and represented their community very, very well. And so, they were my early reflections, really.
What was your motivation for running for council in the first place?
Well, I felt I could bring a different perspective to it as a young person, as a very, very young person, given the breakdown in relationships on Glen Eira Council at the time. And I was very pleased and pleasantly surprised to have been elected. I didn't really expect that I would win a seat on council. But I think, as I said, the community were looking for something different in order to turn a new leaf. And I knew that I could offer something different. I could offer a different perspective.
Was transitioning to a role at the state level part of the plan at the time, or did that evolve as you got your feet under the desk as a councillor?
That probably evolved later. The seat of Bentley was held by Rob Hudson at the time, who now is my chief of staff, actually.
Right.
And I was very much supportive of Rob as the member for Bentley, and I was supported by Rob to run the council. I was encouraged by him and by my other political mentor, Simon Crean, to run for council. But no, state parliament was not on the cards at the time. I was very much grateful for the opportunity to represent the community on council.
So you talk about those governance issues at Glen Eira at the time of your election. Flash forward 20 years, we've got some similar things playing out at some councils around the state at the moment. I wonder how that grounding sets you up as a minister to be able to deal with these issues and what sort of perspective you have on those.
I think it gives me a great perspective. Back then the Local Government Act was very, very different, and there were fewer remedies available in the Act to deal with good governance, or bad governance, I should say. We now have a lot more options available to us. We now can appoint municipal monitors to councils, but crucially, we also have mandatory professional development and mandatory inductions and all of this, because I don't think anybody gets elected to council wanting to, muck up the place or wanting to cause trouble. I think these things just happen over time. And so I think what my experience taught me is that we need to be able to deal with these issues early, indeed prevent these issues from occurring in the first place. Because, you know, if there's one thing I can do as Minister for Local Government while I'm in this job, it is to assist the 79 councils to achieve good governance. And if I relate it back to my experience, one of the first briefings that we received from the officers when we were elected back in 2005 was that the 2 aquatic facilities run by council were in a complete state of disrepair. They were leaking 97,000 litres of water per day. And they couldn't get the previous council to make a decision on it because the previous council were too busy fighting amongst themselves to actually make a decision on the future of these facilities. And so that's a clear example of where not having good governance actually hampers the ability of the council to do its job.
You mentioned that proactive approach that has been a hallmark, I think, of the sector the past few years with the use of monitors, etc. So I'm reading that that's not going to change on your watch. Are you going to be likely to be more inclined to use monitors, for example?
When I became the Minister for Local Government, 2 or 3 months ago, there were 11 councils with monitors. There are now 6. So I'd prefer that we don't have monitors because the monitors also cost the ratepayer, frankly. So look, I prefer that I don't need to appoint monitors. However, I'm realistic. That's going to be necessary at times. And if I deem it necessary, I won't hesitate to do whatever I need to do as Minister to ensure that councils achieve good governance. I will say, though, monitors are not necessarily a punitive measure. I think when we look at appointing monitors, we are trying to assist the council to get things back on track. So if I appoint monitors, it will be because I want to avoid any further intervention. I just want to assist councils to get back on track so that they can do what they're meant to do, and that is represent their communities to the best of their ability.
Thank you, Minister. I'll hand over to Kathryn for some questions after the release of the VLGA's councillor census recently.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Minister, as you're aware, earlier this month, the VLGA released the findings of its first ever Victorian councillor census. And it was a comprehensive census, the first one that's been conducted in the sector for over a decade. Unfortunately and concerningly, more than 80% of respondents stated that they'd experienced threatening or intimidating behaviour in their role as a councillor. Are you alarmed by these findings, and what do you think needs to be done to change the current hostile landscape which many councillors are experiencing?
Thank you. And those were sobering results, really sobering results. I mean, people need to remember that for the most part, councillors are volunteers. They've put themselves forward to work for their communities. And that's an admirable thing to do. And what I would say about that is no councillor, no person in the conduct of their role should be treated in such an appalling manner. And so I have zero tolerance for people who show such disrespect to other people. Zero tolerance. And I am turning my attention to how we deal with this issue. You may have seen at times, in fact, at times recently, councils have opted to go online for their council meetings, and that's done out of an abundance of caution. And, sadly, that is necessary. I mean, I've always thought that social media is a great thing, but it can also be a toxic thing because social media allows people the opportunity to say things out loud that they'd probably normally keep to themselves. And, I am concerned by the lack of respect that we see because at the end of the day, you may disagree with, a decision made by your local councillor. That doesn't mean that you can behave inappropriately. It doesn't mean you can behave inappropriately. Everybody deserves respect. Now, councillors are elected representatives. They are public officials. They need to be able to withstand scrutiny. But there's a difference between applying scrutiny and accountability on an elected official and treating them in a very disrespectful manner and at times threatening their own personal safety. There is a big difference there. There's a line that should not be crossed, a line that should not be crossed. And I can say to all of the councillors that, I as Minister will be taking a zero tolerance approach to this, a zero tolerance approach to this. I think respectful dialogue is the way to go. And yes, councils and parliaments are very robust places, at times very adversarial places. But there's no place for abuse. There's no place for intimidatory behaviour.
Thanks, Minister. And this issue of civility, not only within the chamber, but also amongst the councillors themselves, of course, was something that came through in the census results. The VLGA is committed to undertaking this census annually. How important is the data we've collected to informing government policy, sector discussions and funding allocations in order to enhance the outcomes that councillors deliver to the communities that they represent?
Look, it is very important to me as Minister to have this data because, I'm always turning my attention to what improvements or changes I can make while I am in this role. And so certainly the census data that VLGA have presented will go a long way for the next round of local government reforms to ensuring that we achieve good governance, we achieve proper governance, and we also try our best to address some of the issues that councillors are confronting. I want councillors to be able to do their jobs without fear of intimidation or poor behaviour. I want councillors to just be able to focus on their jobs because, as I said earlier, we forget councillors really are volunteers. Councillors are not paid a full-time wage to do their jobs. They're paid a fairly modest allowance, yet they pour many, many hours a week into their roles. I noticed in your census data, I think most councillors on average spend about 30 hours a week.
That's right, yes.
On their role as councillors. Now, that's nearly a full-time job, but you're certainly not paid a full-time wage. So for the most part, councillors are volunteers. They're there for the right reasons. They just want to represent their communities.
So, Minister, just on that point, do you think there's an opportunity for the state government to work with the local government sector in, I guess, reminding the voters themselves of that very fact? Because often we find that the community members aren't really aware of the responsibilities of the role of a councillor and also the fact that they are volunteers.
For the most part, though, I think the community really do appreciate all of that for the most part, absolutely. There's always a minority of people who try to disrupt the important business of council because they disagree with the decision that has been made. The onus, of course, is on councils to make proper decisions, to make good and proper decisions, to make responsible decisions, but also to ensure that the community has been consulted, the community has brought along on the journey of making that decision. But once a decision has been made, I think it is incumbent on all of us as a community to ensure that we're treating people with respect. It's healthy to voice opinions and to voice opinions passionately. But I have been appalled by some of the behaviour I have seen at some council meetings. There's just no place for that sort of behaviour. And, if a council then is in a position where they decide out of an abundance of caution and for safety reasons that they will have to move a meeting online or shut a public gallery, I know councillors hate doing that. And I know that if they make that decision, they're making that decision very, very reluctantly. We should have open council meetings, and for the most part, we do. The only reason why we don't sometimes is because councillors are concerned with the safety of themselves and or their staff. So it is incumbent on all of us to just act appropriately. It's not that hard. Treat people with respect. Voice your opinions, exercise free speech, but don't overstep the mark. That's all.
Thanks, Minister. Chris, over to you.
Yes, I think those comments are timely too. Thank you, Minister. As we record this, 3 councils have moved their meetings online in the past week: Whittlesea, Casey and Greater Dandenong. Would you be concerned that that becomes more of a trend over time?
Well, I hope it doesn't. I hope it doesn't, and because it's just not, it's not ideal. We are a democracy. Like I'm currently here in the state parliament, and anyone can walk in and out of the public gallery of the state parliament. And I want that to continue. And I also want open council meetings to continue. I suppose the difference between a local council chamber and the state parliament is it is much more accessible to visit your local council chamber. But, I suppose with the exercise of our right to witness democracy in action as citizens of a democracy, that right comes with responsibilities. And the responsibility is, don't act like a pork chop, frankly.
Yep. Well said. Can we move on to the planning and housing reforms? There's been a lot of announcements lately from the state government. Quite a few councils saying that they'd like to be consulted more on these issues. How would you like to see the local government sector brought into those conversations?
Well, I actually think that the local government sector should absolutely be appropriately consulted on a whole range of matters, including this one, because at the end of the day, the local government sector is the level of government closest to the community. We all know that. We all acknowledge that. And there is certainly a significant need in the housing space to increase housing supply. And we've got to be doing things differently to be increasing housing supply in this state, because we do have a housing crisis. But, a lot of our local councils have already completed a lot of the good strategic work in that space. And so this process that the state government is currently going through is actually leveraging the strategic work that has been done by local councils. I know down my way, in my electorate, I'm the member for Bentley, so I cover Glen Eira and Kingston, and both of those councils have done phenomenal work in the town planning space, in the structure planning space, and all of that work is being leveraged by the state government.
We've seen in New South Wales in recent times a number of councils put on notice about being stripped of more of their planning powers if they don't deliver on housing targets and development approval times. Do you see more of that happening in Victoria?
There needs to be accountability. At the same time, I'm confident that the local government sector is going to rise to the challenge of working with the state government to address this significant housing crisis that we're in at the moment. At the end of the day, I'm someone who was born and raised in East Bentley. I'm now the member for Bentley. I still live in East Bentley, but I'm a privileged person. I was able to buy a home in the area where I grew up. And I want every other young person, every other millennial, every other Zoomer to have that opportunity. I don't think that we should be pushing young people out to, areas where they have no connection, no familial connection, no emotional connection, just because it's an area that is affordable. I want people to have the opportunity to buy a home where they grew up, and both local and state government have to rise to that challenge. This is really something for the next generation, but I think decisions that are made now will count a lot for the next generation. And I think if we don't make those decisions now, future generations aren't going to be thanking us.
Thanks, Minister. Let's move on to another topic. Kathryn, gender equality.
Yes, gender equality, Minister. The push to increase the number of women councillors elected at the recent local government elections failed to achieve gender equality, unfortunately. This financial year was the first year in over a decade, probably 15 years, that the VLGA didn't receive state government funding towards our work in the gender equality space, and in particular, support of our very well-known local Women Leading Change program. We'd really like to see the sector work together to achieve gender equality, and believe more funding needs to be directed towards the experts that elicit positive change in this space. As the new local government minister, what are your plans to help address this issue moving forward?
Well, in 1920, Victoria had one woman councillor, Mary Rogers, at the old Richmond Council, and today we have 43% of all councillors women. And I think that is a phenomenal improvement over that period of time. Having said that, it is not enough. We want a 50-50. We want at least 50% women on our councils. I will do whatever I need to as minister to encourage the sector to encourage more women to stand for council. A couple of things I think that can be done there. Firstly, let's make councils the best possible environment for all people to serve, including women. Let's get rid of some of the toxic elements that sometimes creep in to being a local council, like some of the things that we were just discussing. Let's do all of that. Secondly, let's elevate the achievements of women in our local communities. You know, let's have more buildings named after women, more sports pavilions. Let's have more statues of women. Let's elevate the role of women in our local communities. You know, a long time ago, well, at the start of my parliamentary career, actually, a local sports pavilion was being rebuilt, the Julie Cooper Pavilion at Centenary Park in East Bentley. Now, the Julie Cooper Pavilion was named after Moorabbin's first female mayor and councillor. And at the time, the council had a policy of not actually naming buildings after councillors or after anyone. And when a building was demolished and rebuilt, it would be rebuilt without the name. And I thought that this was the wrong approach, especially in this case, because of the achievements of Julie Cooper as the first woman to serve on Moorabbin Council, first woman to be mayor of Moorabbin, but also someone who was very, very instrumental in establishing the junior footy club at Centenary Park as well. And thankfully, the council was persuaded by me and by others in the community that Julie Cooper's name should remain on the building, and it is to this day, which is wonderful. But we need to go a lot further in celebrating the achievements of women in their local communities, and I have actually written to every mayor about that on International Women's Day.
Thank you, Minister.
So, Minister, a couple of things you said there I just wanted to pick up on. So South Australia and Tasmania, I think just in the last couple of weeks have released data about that issue of harassment and particularly the impact on more women wanting to enter local politics. It just occurs to me, I just wonder whether you compare notes with your counterparts in other states. Is there a local government ministers alliance group?
Well, there is, but I haven't met those local government ministers yet. But given you've said that, I'll put it on the top of my list to reach out to them. Most definitely. Because at the end of the day, I mean, we get this as members of parliament as well. You know, I look at my social media feed sometimes, and I think to myself, goodness, I was raised not to speak to other people in that manner. But sometimes I think people's emotions outrun their intelligence, and there we are. And we've just got to treat everybody with respect. That's all.
So you mentioned earlier the mandatory training, the new regime that have been introduced since the Local Government Act 2020. How do you think this is going to benefit the sector? Do you see it delivering any tangible improvements so far?
I think it's going to benefit the sector greatly. 20 years ago, when I was elected to council, there was no mandatory training. Having said that, I was elected to a council with a very good CEO, and he put in place an induction period and designed an induction period. A lot of it was based on the poor governance issues at that council previously. And so I did go through quite, a robust induction period 20 years ago. But, at that time, most other councils, you were basically thrown into it. There you go. Learn on the job. And to a certain degree, beyond the mandatory training, you are learning on the job. Every one of us is a lifelong learner, and you have different experiences along the way. Having said that, I think the mandatory training is very, very important all those reasons that I outlined earlier in this interview, Chris, and that is that we want to prevent, problems before they arise. Because if we do that, it means I don't have to exercise my powers under the Local Government Act, which I don't like to do. I just don't like to do. I want people to conduct their jobs appropriately and just work hard for their communities.
As you reflect back on your time as a councillor, I wonder, when you first came on Glen Eira Council, there was no mandatory training, was there? How helpful might that have been for you in getting your head around the challenges and the responsibilities of the role then?
Very helpful. Even though it wasn't mandatory, our council, as I said, did have its own training program. But I suppose when you get on council, you suddenly have to make very, very important decisions. It was interesting. When I was on council, it was like a council is like a cabinet style form of government. You're just making decisions all the time in a sort of cabinet format. Then when I became a local MP, I made very, very few decisions as a local MP. I make a lot of them now as a minister, but as a councillor, you are making very important decisions that impact people's lives and livelihoods, decisions around planning permit applications, planning scheme amendments, important budgetary decisions. Councils have significant powers under the Local Government Act. Councils also run significant budgets. You're making very, very important decisions. So, you need to ensure that you're equipped with all the knowledge to be able to make good decisions.
And I think on that point, Minister, that the candidate training requirement is really effective, certainly from the VLGA's perspective. And we ran multiple candidate training sessions in lead up to the election, because of course you don't know what you don't know until you suddenly find yourself in this role that is incredibly complex, and as you yourself said, very different to the role of a local MP in some way, in terms of the responsibility and the extent of the decision making that occurs at that local governance level. So reassuring that we still have the candidate training requirement, but very pleased also to see that ongoing professional development requirement. Chris,
Sure.
I jumped in. Sorry about that.
Not a problem. Minister, did you want to react to that?
Look, and perhaps, the only thing I'd add to that, Kathryn, is with the candidate training, we should also keep looking at that to ensure that we are facilitating, more women putting their hands up as well. The conversation we just had. We do want to get to 50-50.
Minister, a side question, if I may, without notice. As we sit here this morning, there's a dozen councils around the state that are in the market for a new CEO. And I've often talked about on our podcasts about the increasing complexity of the role and the politicisation of the role of CEOs. Last night, as we record this, one mayor has called for a CEO to be stood down. In fact, has called on you to ask that CEO to stand down. I wonder about your observations on that CEO role and your approach, I guess, to those challenges as minister.
I believe that the most important relationship in a council is the one between the elected councillors and the council CEO. There's no doubt about that. And because of that, I believe in councillors having a stake in the success of the CEO that they choose. I don't agree with certain people who don't think councillors should appoint the CEO. I do not agree with that at all, because it is such an important relationship. And if councillors don't have a stake in the success of the CEO, then the CEO and the council will not be successful. And the council's success and the CEO's success means the community's success. So what I do think we need is, I think we need to ensure that every council, when making decisions on the appointment and reappointment of CEOs, are guided by professional advice, from a HR perspective. That is what I think we need. And I'm turning my attention to how we do that.
So there's currently requirements to have that advice on recruitment and selection committees, etc. Are you flagging perhaps a beefing up of those requirements on councils?
Well, you might be aware that there was an IBAC recommendation from Operation Sandon that went to these issues. So I am turning my attention to how I would implement that recommendation.
We'll wait to hear more. Kathryn, any final questions for the Minister?
Minister, not a question, but again, just to thank you for your time this morning. It's been really interesting hearing some of your priorities for the sector. The VLGA member councillors will really appreciate some of those reflections that you shared with us about your time as a councillor, and we look very much forward to working with you in the portfolio.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this opportunity. And I just also want to finish by, reaching out to every one of the local councillors in Victoria, just to say that, I'm one of you. I started in local government, and while my role as local government minister can often be described as the cop on the beat, I really just want to be a partner to the local government sector. So I'm looking forward to working with the sector over the time that I'm the minister.
Anytime there's an issue you'd like to expose to the sector and talk through, Minister, there's an open invitation for you to join us on VLGA Connect.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Minister Nick Staikos, the Minister for Local Government in Victoria, our guest on VLGA Connect. Kathryn, thank you for dropping in for today's episode. Good to see you.
Thanks, Chris. A pleasure to be with you. Thanks, Minister.
Thank you.